Welcome to Charles Dickens' A Brain on Fire, a series that digs deep into the life and works of one of the greatest novelists of all time. In Bath, on the 29th of November 1768, the great Thomas Gainsborough painted a portrait of a servant of the Montague household. Gainsborough's subject is a man of colour, but he is not presented here as you might expect him to be. He is not offering up a basket of fruit to a fine lady, or carrying her flowers. He is not standing in the corner of a richly furnished drawing-room while his masters are seated in front of him. He is alone, effortlessly dressed in fine clothes, with a bright, patriotic red waistcoat with gold trimmings and a dazzling white cravat. His right hand rests comfortably inside his clothes over a well-fed belly. This is Charles Ignatius Sancho, writer, composer, actor, abolitionist, and grocer. Born on an Atlantic slave ship in 1729, now a gentleman, living among the aristocracy. He will become the first black man to vote in a British parliamentary election and the first to have an obituary in the national press. His correspondence, published 2 years after his death, includes a thrilling account of the Gordon riots, which he witnessed firsthand, and he even breaks off his writing at one point with the words,
"Gracious God, what's the matter now? I was obliged to leave off. The shouts of the mob, the horrid clashing of swords, and the clutter of a multitude in swiftest motion drew me to the door. It is now just 5 o'clock. The ballad singers are exhausting their musical talents with the downfall of popery."
The violence of the London mob leads Sancho to conclude,
"I am not sorry I was born in Afrique."
Another letter describes a prisoner as
A daring chap escaped from Newgate, was the most active in mischief at Lord Montague's, and was the first person shot by the soldiers. So he found death a few hours sooner than if he had not been released.
I'm thrilled to welcome today's guest, Paterson Joseph, who has been an award-winning actor of stage and screen for over 30 years, with lead roles at the Royal Shakespeare Company and Royal National Theatre. His screen credits range from The Beach, directed by Danny Boyle and starring Leonardo DiCaprio, to a personal favourite of mine, his portrayal of Harrison Ames in the HBO series Avenue 5, created by one of our previous guests, Armando Iannucci. He is currently appearing opposite Daisy Haggard in the BBC thriller Boat Story. Paterson also played Scrooge in Jack Thorne's adaptation of A Christmas Carol at the Old Vic. Paterson has also written and performed solo dramas about Sancho's extraordinary life, and has now written a thrilling novel, The Secret Diaries of Charles Ignatius Sancho, a book I thoroughly recommend should be bought and placed inside stockings this Christmas. It spans Sancho's entire life and is powerfully told. It struck me also as being very Dickensian in so many aspects. To give one example, there's a moment very early on where a young Sancho stands at a crossroads in his life, with the terrible slave-catcher Jonathan Sill standing at one path, and the kind and benevolent John, Duke of Montague, at the other. Paterson, hello and welcome to Charles Dickens' A Brain on Fire. It's so fantastic to have you here.
Thank you, Dominic. It's lovely to be invited.
I've just finished your novel, The Secret Diaries of Charles Ignatius Sancho, and I've been completely swept away on such a vibrant, colourful journey about someone I knew nothing about. How did that come about for you?
So Sancho is someone I found way back in 1999, even though I was already in my late 30s, a black British figure that I should have known about. So when I began to figure out a way of presenting him, I started with a monodrama, Sancho, An Act of Remembrance. But that was the sort of thrust of it, and always been the thrust of it, is to sort of get people to see him as I saw him, the surprising figure of this man painted like a lord by Thomas Gainsborough in 1768 in that portrait. And it just makes me feel that each time I present Sancho, that's what I'm doing. So to immerse myself in him, which is my trick, and was reading this morning that Dickens' preface to Tale of Two Cities, he talks about that immersion in the mind of the characters, the times that he's writing about. And I guess that's what I'm trying to do. And it's really gratifying when people get it. But I'm really trying to introduce you to the mind and the thinking of this extraordinary man, Charles Ignatius Sancho.
Yes, well, you've definitely done that, and there's something incredibly Dickensian about the fact that you've acted him, you've walked about as that character, and you've spoken his words aloud, and then you've set it down on paper.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to read this bit because it struck me even just this morning. So, A Tale of Two Cities. My story with Tale of Two Cities is that at drama school, they were always looking for things that they could use for big casts because you've got quite a number of students. So they chose to adapt A Tale of Two Cities. So we each got a section and we worked it up and put songs in it. So it's one that's sort of dear to my heart. And of course, got that brilliant opening line. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. But here's his preface. It's not that long, if you don't mind me reading it. When I was acting with my children and friends in Mr. Wilkie Collins' drama of The Frozen Deep, I first conceived the main idea of this story. A strong desire was upon me then to embody it in my own person. As the idea became familiar to me, it gradually shaped itself into its present form. Throughout its execution, it has had complete possession of me. I have so far verified what is done and suffered in these pages, as that I have certainly done and suffered it all myself. Brilliant thing about that is it feels like he is immersing himself like an actor does, hot seating himself as the characters involved in this French Revolution story. And that's precisely what I did. It's amazing to me to see that Dickens was so ahead of the game in that he linked storytelling and history and theatre in that way, and he would perform himself. He's my forerunner, very much so in terms of that. But the immersion, which is why I think we love Dickens so much, is so complete. He's such a fantastic sort of Daniel Day-Lewis of literature, isn't he? He just sort of disappears into these characters. When you think about Pickwick, which is another one of my favourites, I don't have many Dickens books. I sort of give them away, I think. But the two that I've kept, I think out of a sense of sort of love for them, are the Tale of Two Cities that I have still with my annotations from drama school. I was a much more diligent actor then. And the Pickwick Papers. Just because the characters in this and the descriptions of people, the way he lavishes his attention on the minutiae of people gives you psychology. So suddenly we're reading a psychological drama as well as, a great rollicking tale of all these sort of disparate characters. There's character development and transformation. So he has to be, for anybody who thinks that they can tackle a novel, especially about a big time or about big events, you have to go to Dickens just because he was so good at reporting as well as immersing himself in these events and times.
Yes, and to be so generous with detail in such a strong sensory way. There was a moment in your book that did strike me as quite Dickensian. I think where Sancho goes to the Black Tar Tavern.
Oh, yeah.
And he meets Anne for the first time, and all that detail about they were the most extraordinary instruments, describing drums and various things. I think that's a pure Dickensian moment there.
Yeah, and there's no doubt about it. The Black Tar Tavern, because I didn't want to just paint a pretty picture, it was an imperative of mine to describe a scene that historians and visitors to London and the other cities in England had described, which was what they called black hops or Negro frolics. So this idea that there was a sort of jump up, there was a dance of some kind, a rave, and that there were black people with their women and instruments playing, but never described. They never describe it in any detail. There was one on Fleet Street that was described by the Morning Chronicle in the 1760s. And it says, here's a tavern in London and Fleet Street frequented by black men and their women. They dance and play instruments. No whites are allowed to enter. And I think that's highly unlikely that no white person would be allowed to enter. But there would have been all sorts of people. So now I do describe the Irish Catholics, who were a persecuted minority, deeply persecuted. We might hear about the Gordon riots later, which they were part of. We also would have had Arab sailors. We would have had Indian sailors, Lascars. We would have had the free blacks. We would have had servants, possibly runaway slaves, if they would risk going out of a night, would be there. There were lots of runaway slaves. So what those instruments were Dominic, what that sounded like. That's where Dickens is brilliant, is that he'll give you sensuality. He'll give you the smell of a place. He'll let you know exactly what was, dripping off the nose of a streetmonger. It's about a time travel, if you like. It's about taking yourself right back and immersing yourself in. And that's, I guess, I had to imitate that. He's the door you have to go through, I think. But nobody does it better than him. Nobody.
I'd love to read you a thought that I jotted down from reading your book and how it sort of really affected me. But I felt that you as an author in writing this, you have an actor's gift of allowing an audience to feel, not just pushing buttons or trying to draw sound and fury. This makes your story more powerful and allows the shame to cut deeper when the reader's conscience is given the space to work for itself.
Oh, that's beautiful. What a great review that is. Thank you. I love that. I'll put that on my wall.
If only I was famous, you could have used that on your cover. But that's certainly what I felt, because if you'd written a book that was full of fury at the slave trade and the treatment of black people in England in those times, no one would have gone, well, there's no justification for that. Fair-minded people would have been right behind that. But you go so deeper and far more complex, which I'd love to talk to you about, because I think that's really extraordinary. In these pages, you celebrate the beauty of white people and black people and the ugliness depending on their character, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think that my duty with Sancho and with any character I've ever played is not to exploit them in any way or use them as a cipher for some other idea that I have. And it's sort of the tension between wanting to make something feel weighty enough. Why deal with the subject of Britain under slavery if you're not going to deal with slavery in some way? But because I'm not a polemicist and I'm not a politician, that wouldn't have suited me. I'm a storyteller. So how can I wrap it in a story was my challenge. And the thing I've always said, Dominic, was that I mustn't make Sancho a 20th or 21st century person. He's a man of his time. And that's what I mean about the immersion, is that if you don't immerse yourself properly in the time, you can end up having anachronistic ideas or sentiments. And so Sancho grows in the novel. And I think that's probably helped give him that sense of giving us the sense of being in his head, because there may be things that we know more than he does about the slave trade or about the politics of the world, but he's only 10 or he's only 15 or he's only 19 at the time I'm recounting some of these incidences in his life. So he knows what he knows then. To really hold on to the integrity of the story is to fight the urge to tell in this sort of godly way, looking down, moralizing about things, is actually, I think, the visceral quality, hopefully, of the hit when you hear the slave ship account, for example, or what happens to one of these poor girls on the sugar plantation Anne goes to. That it's a natural occurrence with the character. It's not something you put them into that situation in order to get something out of them.
How did you get from looking at sources and Sancho's letters, I presume, to then adapting it and acting it as a solo piece first of all? What was that step? And I suppose the second part of that question, if it's not an overload, did you then come to the end of that feeling that there was more that you wanted to say? You had unfinished business with a character and then you found yourself writing a novel?
So I started researching Sancho in 1999. I picked up a book called Black England, which has just been republished by Gretchen Gertziner. And I found a bunch of characters in it who were just unbelievable, like Septimius Severus, who was the Emperor of Rome in the 2nd and 3rd century AD. In Britain, he came to Britain and he was from Libya, his wife Julia from Syria, and all these troops that came over from Eastern Europe with him and Sub-Saharan and North Africa. And I was blown away by it. So finding Sancho drove me to tell these stories that seemed to have been curated from my history. So rather than do a complex play, which of course I didn't feel the confidence to do, I thought, let me do what I do as an actor. That's what I wanted to do with Sancho. So what was it like? What if I had no recollection of my parents? My birth was mysterious and I only picked it up from bits of fragments I heard from gossip from servants or overhearing my mistresses. I'm a black child in the middle of 1700s London, and I have no friends, no family. By the time I'm 15, probably overeducated with the secret books I'm getting from the Duke of Montagu. And I don't fit into the working scene either, not really.
I got from your book, London has laws against black people working in the city, doesn't it?
Yeah, in the city itself, I mean, the city was very narrow now, very much the city of London as we think of it around, the Bank of England, etc. But then there was obviously the wider borough and Westminster, etc. you could work in. That world needed me to explain it. But what I didn't want to do was have a whole bunch of characters obscuring our knowledge of Sancho. So the one-person show came to mind through a kind of immersion in hot seating him. And then I thought, we've got to set the scene. And so I set it in the painting room of Gainsborough. And on the back of the portrait, which is in Canada, in the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa, it says that it was painted in 100 minutes by Thomas Gainsborough in Bath in 1768. And I thought, well, let me make my show, roughly speaking, about 100 minutes. And I thought that's a good gauge. Let me start there. I'm sitting having my portrait painted, and there are people who are watching it happen, and then I'm going to talk to them. That's very public. And that is Sancho showing and telling people who he is. And then you get the portrait, which is Sancho's hand immersed in his waistcoat like that, is the sign of a gentleman of leisure, as we know. The way he has his hand tucked into his waistcoat. But he was a valet to the Duke of Montagu, very high in the court of the Georgian kings, Montagu. But there he is, that bright red waistcoat, the gold braiding, the bright buttons, the white cravat, the look on his face. Everything about that painting is like a cinematographer's dream, the lighting. He's painting by candlelight, Gainsborough, so he's obviously controlling the lighting and the shade. Then his letters, which are being read aloud, because hardly anybody could read. They're also curated, letters to the newspapers, obviously. His music, which is like dance music, jigs, reels, cotillions, they're all, everything's public about him. So the book, which I wrote mainly during lockdown, I wrote some of it in 2018, but mainly during lockdown, 2020, has all of that in it, has all of the sort of flower and flounce that Sancho has, his love of words, his vanity of words and expressions and classical illusions, etc., all of that. But the still voice of the inner monologue is also in there as well. And I think, and I say it on the road, that novels are the most intimate form of storytelling. Yes, you could argue that the oral tradition can match it, but the oral tradition is a bit like anybody tells you a story again. They're always telling you a slightly different angle. They're always embellishing it slightly. The past is always being embellished each time we tell it. Whereas a fixed story on a page is the perfect communication from writer to reader. And you're there immersed on your own in a room. And as long as you can decipher the hieroglyphs, they form pictures in your head that are just absolutely unique to you. No one's cast Jane Eyre for you. No one's cast Becky Sharp in Vanity Fair. No one casts Tom Jones in The Fielding. No one has done that. It's just you in your head. This is what he looks like. This is what Sophia looks like. And it's perfect. And that's why I think I wanted to pour out my 22 or so years at that point of knowledge of Sancho into something as intimate as that, because it would get it all out rather than the sketchy form, which you have to do with a play. You can't do everything because it would be 5 hours long.
This is why it's such a joy to read, is that, yes, I could enjoy it in a historical way. I can enjoy feeling like the past is very different. But actually, I think equally and possibly more powerful is when you feel, obviously, the resonances today. So, for example, the experience of wanting to fix your hair with oils so that an African's hair doesn't stand out amongst a lot of white people's hair.
Yeah.
That has a very powerful contemporary resonance. I mean, how does that impact on you personally when you're exploring all of this? Do you feel a kind of remove from it, or is it a combination of the two?
I didn't really register what I was writing. It was just the practicalities of how he gets his hair to look like that. If you look at the portrait, his hair looks as if it's been straightened and pulled back. And it might be a surprising thing we find out Sancho is mixed heritage in some way, because his hair is very soft. It's not tight and curly. So it was really just a practical thing. But of course, when you look back at these things, you go, oh my God, yeah, that is such a modern reference to westernizing yourself or Europeanizing yourself in terms of hair. Black girls in particular have this massive problem of the way they're treated, depending on whether they have something that's culturally, more African in their hairstyle, and the billion-dollar market in hair straighteners, which is all about conforming to a sort of Western image. But that's sort of a byproduct of the world you live in. Like if I was just describing a bit like Mallory Blackman does in Noughts and Crosses, when she talks about, Callum cutting his finger and Sefi going to get him plaster and the plaster being flesh-coloured, but the flesh is brown. That's sort of purposefully laid there to shock us and wake us up. And so many young people read that, suddenly been enlightened by it. And I think that was purposeful. But I think a lot of what I'm doing, what I did in the novel, and I look back at it now, of course, and I can see it, are literal truths of his life that I just laid down and then imagined what it would be like to have to practically work those things out. I mean, I think about things like education. He was refused the right to read. His first letter to Lawrence Stern, who he writes to and has a lovely correspondence for a couple of years, he says something like, the people who were guardians of me thought that ignorance was the best guarantee for obedience. So they didn't teach him how to read, and he runs away from home and is found by the Duke of Montagu, who educates him secretly. Well, I was part of that cohort of African Caribbean kids who were labelled ESN by the British educational establishment, educationally subnormal. We were definitely treated in that way. I went to school in the late 60s, early 70s. And you just knew it. You just knew you were being treated in that way without the teacher even knowing who you were, that there was a dismissal of your intellect. And I ran away and I played truant and I read a lot in the library all day and all night whenever I could. Bunked off for about 2 years at the end of school. But that idea of, oh, that's a thing I'm writing about Sancho because I know that's what's happened to him. And then looking back and going, but that mirrors my life so much.
That's so interesting. Of course, elements of your experience in your life are going to come out through a first-person narrative about Sancho. You couldn't help it with the best will in the world, and it's all the stronger for it. But education, in the late 60s and in the 70s, did you feel that it must be the case that if you are treated like you're educationally subnormal, that you lose the confidence in what you have to say? Was it acting that and being good at learning and reading and being articulate? Was that your way out of that trap that was set for you so early on?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was lucky in that there were avenues for me to explore drama, and later, I was about 18 at that point. And also that there was no pressure on me to make money. When I told my mum at about 18 that I wanted to be an actor, she's got 6 other kids, so, she basically went, well, as long as you make money, and walked off, And I remember saying to her, the door just closed, Mum, actors don't really make money. I knew enough about it to know that. But I was lucky in that I found that, because I don't know where I would have gone or how I would have coped with it. I did cope with it. You do cope with it. If somebody says you're educationally subnormal, then there's 2 things that go on. There is the external, I've been given this, oh God, they've told me that I'm this. And then there's whatever battle you have with yourself internally, whether you believe it or not. And I knew that I wasn't thick. That was the word they used. I knew that I wasn't thick, but I didn't think I was academic. I thought there was something wrong with the way I was being taught because it wasn't engaging me. But it wasn't about being engaged. It wasn't a fancy word. It was just, it's not sticking with me and I'm not good at it. But what I am good at is just reading. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to read. And that's what I did. And I was lucky that there was a library, Willesden Green Library, that it had, funding and that it was there. I don't know what I would have done otherwise. I used to sometimes walk I was at Northwest London. I used to sometimes walk from school. So after I did the register, Joseph, yes, sir. Then I'd walk out of school. Genius idea. And not recommended to anybody. But I would then walk from Harlesden, Northwest London, about an hour and a bit to Brent Cross. And in Brent Cross, there was a W.H. Smith's, a large one. And they had a book section, so I'd all go in there as well and read new books. Very carefully, trying not to bend anything,
And were you accosted? Did people say, "Why aren't you at school?"
No, oh, no. I don't even know why. It wasn't like I looked like a bloke. I was very short and very childlike, even up to the age of sort of 16. I don't really know why, actually. I don't think it was a very caring school, clearly, because they only sent 2 messages back home. There were 2 letters, and we did have a phone, so they could have phoned. In the 2 years that I bunked off, I intercepted them both, and I could sign my mum's signature. So I just signed the signature, and that was that. They never phoned. They never inquired. But that's a sinkhole school. It's horrible, and it doesn't exist anymore, thank goodness.
Yeah.
There you go. I mean, the question might be then, how did I come to have the confidence even to write? I've always written, and I've always wanted to write. I've always been a storyteller in one way or another, but I hid it, like a lot of people do, hid it in the bottom drawer. And I'd always been writing about the past and about my parents' generation a lot, sort of obsessed with it, and my generation and how we fit and how we didn't fit, how we were different. And so coming to think about what I would want to write is when I had that question from name drop Tilda Swinton when we were working on the beach in 1998. And she said, "What do you want to be remembered for before you die?" And so I said, well, it was a very Tilda question, I think, at the time. And so I basically said, I'd like to write a book, film, play, I don't know, about the Black presence in Britain before my parents' generation, for the younger generation to know who they are. And then we carried on playing cards or whatever we were doing. And I honestly think that is the reason that I'm still doing this today. I realized that I had been writing it, but now I was going to take it seriously. And I didn't start with Sancho. I started with modern and parent stuff when I properly started writing. A sort of mission to tell that story, which had been missing.
Yes, I think I'm returning to the point that possibly I made a little bit earlier on that, though, is the manner in which you go about it is so generous and embracing and includes everyone.
Oh.
You know, there's that moment where Sancho talks about the cause.
Yes.
And I think readers of every background could get behind the cause that's in this. And at what point did you start to know that there was actually a Black history in the United Kingdom before Windrush and before your parents' generation?
I would not have known until I believe I picked up Black England about anything other than that odd character. Didn't know anything about the Tudor court, John Blank, the great famous trumpeter for Henry VII and VIII, and the other Black musicians and courtiers who were part of, the entourage of Catherine of Aragon, etc. I didn't know anything about Shakespeare's London, that there would have been Black people there, because I was never taught it and never saw it. It had been curated out of all the history that I'd ever seen. And yet it's there. It's archivally there. If you read Miranda Kaufman's Black Tudors, you just get an array of people. You just think, my God, why don't we know this? Why has this not been a film? This is just dying for a depiction. So why I wanted to, I suppose, talk about Sancho in those terms that are inclusive rather than polemic and accusatory is that he himself calls his letters conversible. He says they're conversible. And what he means by that is he wants to have a conversation. You can't have a conversation if you're leaving out people who are part of that conversation. And I get why there are some, particularly Black writers, etc., thinkers who say, well, we're no longer explaining racism to white people. We're moved on from that. White people have to deal with it. I would say, yeah, I mean, I get that point of view, but most of the circle of friends, colleagues that I hang out with are white. So I have to deal with the fact that my world's not a world in which I can shut that argument down. And not that I would even want to, but I have to have a conversation with the audience that I have in front of me, as opposed to an audience that I would like to have in front of me or would prefer to have in front of me. And I think that's the same with the writing, is that I'm imagining an audience that is of everybody. And then the book is written, as I say right at the beginning, this is our story. This is our story. It's a human story. It's a story about Britons, and they happen to be Black, and it happens to be a longer time ago than you would imagine. But that's the world I want to paint for you, the world that wasn't painted for me when I was growing up. And I never thought it was missing until I found it, this massive landscape that I want everybody to see, not just Black people. I mean, again, come back to our subject, Dickens, that's what he did. He wants to have a conversation and interrogate our obvious tropes of working poor, they must be criminal. The landed gentry, they must be the greatest and the wisest. And he's always undermining these ideas. And the smartest people are the ones who live hand to mouth on the street. And the dumbest people are the ones who have all these powers and levers of power. To follow his example and to have other people be able to read it, and even though it doesn't affect them, ethnically, it's not their ethnicity that is being addressed, or their demographic, or their gender. To find a way of making that feel connected was most important to me.
That thing you were saying about the complexity of characters, I think when we first meet Jonathan Sill, who's a fantastic villain in the piece, isn't he? The slave catcher. But there's this moment, I'm sure it's in the first instance, and this is, Paterson, forgive me, this is where I misquote your own book back at you, but you mentioned there's at one point where you talk about his blue eyes that might have been fair or handsome had he not been such a total ratbag, basically. And another character, if we're going to spin the character wheel, Francis Williams is very interesting, isn't he? He meets Sancho, a very young Sancho, doesn't he, in the Duke's library. But I love the way that he goes next door to play piano and sing something ironic that undermines. Could you talk a little bit about that? How would you set that up to explain to us what that's about? Because that's so fascinating.
Well, so Francis Williams is a real person, and there is a very strange painting of him, but you can certainly look him up. And he is a Jamaican teacher, free man, from free parents. And he is sponsored somehow by John, Duke of Montagu, who's the man who rescued Sancho when he ran away from home at the age of 7. And he rescues him and gives him books secretly. So Francis Williams is said to have studied at Cambridge. There's no record of him at Cambridge. I wonder if there might have been certificates that he passed. They emerge over time. But when Francis and Sancho meet for the first time, Sancho's about 11, I think. And they meet in the library of the Duke of Montagu in Blackheath. And it isn't an easy relationship because Sancho has never had a black person in authority over him. And Francis is obviously extremely well educated. And Sancho, because he's usually the only one in any situation, does a thing that those of us who are sort of isolated either by gender or ethnicity in certain places that are culturally, monocultural. Sancho feels the specialness of himself despite himself, feels his isolation and his uniqueness despite himself. So the introduction of another black person, he does it with Rio, the Rio Montagu, who was one of the servants of the Duke of Montagu, where he thinks, oh, this is a black boy, they're going to tell me to go away because there can't be 2 black boys in a household. That strange psychology of, if I'm the only one, then I must be special. Oh, but there's someone else here, so what does that make me? I wanted to deal with that a little bit. It's a sort of drop. He doesn't think about it too much because he's too naive to figure that out. It's not until later that he says, I was very rude to him, or I treated him with suspicion. But Francis is not a perfect character either. He's quite grand. And then I also wanted him to be a little bit like some of the uncles that I've known, to be slightly gnomic, that you think you know what he's saying, but actually when you think about it, has he just insulted me? Or is he trying to instruct me, but he's not saying it in a straight way, And then when he goes off to play the Roast Beef of England, it's just such a weird tune. It's such a weird tune. And he plays it on the harpsichord, like with vigor, and performs. Suddenly this intellectual giant becomes a sort of slightly musical character, but with a snidey dig at England, And Sancho's lost because he doesn't know where he's at. He's been shown satire before he's really even sort of understood the world that he's in, and he can't quite figure it out. It's not till later, I think, that he figures it out. And then Francis at some point plays Country Gardens. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Because it was like he's messing with his mind. So those characters, to me, they're like not straightforwardly, oh, these are heroic characters going to tell him all about slavery, take him under his wing. That's not quite how it works. And then Jonathan Sill, who is my Bill Sykes. So my first role, actually, there's 2 Dickens stories that I have about my childhood. So the first one is, even when I was sort of 6 or 7, school was a bit of a struggle. I had one great teacher, a lady called Mrs. Bird, who was from Goa. And she told me much later that she sort of protected the Irish kids and the black kids because she knew what the scheme was, how they were going to treat us. So she was lovely. I knew her all to the point at which she died a few years ago. Beautiful woman. But Mrs. Bird put me in a sort of sketch of Oliver Twist, which is the trial scene. And I was cast as the Beadle, 7 years old. And we're in the assembly hall and I've got an entrance. And she says, "Oh, could you make sure that when you jump up to do entrance, that you don't jump up because you're meant to be a bit of an older man." I remember thinking, okay. And then, of course, when the day came and the audience was there, I jumped up to do my bit and walked across. And then I stopped halfway and sort of looked at her, at the audience, but it looked like I was doing it at the audience. And I got a massive laugh. And I looked at her and she was pissing herself laughing. And I thought, oh, God, I got away with it. But I was terrified that I'd done something wrong because I leapt up that way. And then I walked slowly. So I remember playing the Beadle and I remember sort of enjoying sort of shouting the odds. And then the other Dickens, I'm 10 years old. And again, I get cast as Bill Sikes. Somebody said, "Oh, that's terrible casting." I was like, I didn't think about that. I was the only black kid in the school. So I was probably maybe undersensitive, but it didn't seem to me, it just seemed like a great role to me. And I couldn't sing as well as Maurice O'Connell and John O'Connell, who were really good singers, and they were playing Twist and Fagin. So I came on for this entrance, my very first entrance, and the feeling of, ooh, the sort of joy of the pantomime villain, which I didn't understand. I just knew I was getting this feeling that I was a bad guy. Honestly, it was like the best experience I ever had at school, ever, and the most compliments I ever received. So that Bill Sikes role, I've always had an eye on it. And when I came to describe Jonathan Sill, I wanted to have that thing where you go, I'm really attracted to this character somehow. There's some fire, some energy about him, but he's an absolute bastard. He's an absolute evil, two-dimensional, nasty figure. And Jonathan Sill is that figure. I don't give him a lot of backstory. I do give him some family, but I mean, he's not in it often enough. I wanted him to be just that menacing presence to signify that it's not safe here, and it certainly wasn't safe. But describing his eyes as the eyes of the bluest blue, eyes that would have been seen as near beautiful if the intent within them were not so deadly. I know those eyes. I know those eyes where it is. It's sort of, wow, this beautiful color, but behind it, there's rage or menace. So yeah, that was all part of just painting as deep a picture of the world as possible. And there are obviously some wonderful people like John Duke of Montagu who are characters that they're not like the white hero. It's not like, Montagu basically sees Sancho for the first time. That's the most important thing for Sancho. Montagu is the first person who looks at him and goes, "I see you." And that love that he has for him is genuine, and it's in his letters. He absolutely adores the Montagues without reservation. It's a father and son relationship that could seem incongruous, but I'm certain was true of them, given the writing.
Yeah, it's very powerful. All the moments where the Duke comes into Sancho's life, and I'll misquote you again, but you talk about, I think, one of Sancho's first impressions about how his opinion of the white world had sunk so low that he expected only something awful from the Duke, and then the opposite happens for him. There's a complexity there as well, because there's a moment where Sancho questions the Duke's motives a little bit, possibly from talking to Francis Williams about whether Sancho and he are projects.
Yes.
Little pet projects for the white man to...
Yes, I mean, I think that that's a logical conclusion. If you are asked to perform the thing that you can do, which is play the harpsichord and the violin and all these other instruments for some guests of the Duke, then you would do that. I've done that myself, where I went to the Buccleuchs, who are the Montagues, about 5 years ago, perhaps, to do a documentary, and I performed a little bit of the one-person show in one of their drawing rooms. And it was behind the painting, Gainsborough's painting of the Duke and Duchess, who were Sancho's boss later in his life. And I didn't think of it then. It was for the Buccleuch family. And I thought, I'm really glad I've conveyed this story, because they're interested in the Sancho bit of their world. They're doing lots of archive work, and they really sort of, mean it. It's great. There was also part of you that went, have I just done this thing where I've just performed for the Duke? Is this dignified, or is it somehow I'm a sort of, paid performer? It feels a bit odd. And that sort of hybrid feeling, I suppose, bled into the book as well, that you go, no, it's wonderful. Look, I'm presenting before George II or George III, and I'm doing a bit of Ovid's Metamorphosis. This is a wonderful privilege. And at the same time, yes, I'm there for their entertainment. So there is, I don't think it's solvable, but there is a kind of circular thing of like, no, this is a good thing. I'm presenting myself, and I'm presenting, if you like, even if I'm representing Black intelligence, here I am being Sancho and being really intelligent and showing that we can be artistic and sensible. And then you go out and think, do I really need to do that? So all the complicated things that performing lends itself to, those ideas that you are a servant, yes, but you're also meant to be somehow conveying something, in that Hamlet way of catching the conscience of kings and queens, with our art.
You saying that almost in a way reminds me of the seeming high status and the very low status of an actor in general.
Yeah.
Because anyone that is an actor can sort of see you as a kind of superhero, as a king, a prince, but actually you think, no, you're the last piece of the jigsaw. So often in any project, you're right at the end, and you're a pawn on the chessboard.
Yes, I remember.
So often.
I remember hearing that years ago. There's an old actor passed away now, called Dinsdale Langdon. And I remember him saying, oh, we're merely waiters. We're just waiters, and feeling really insulted by that. No, we just deliver what has been given to us, and we just lay it on the table. I don't think we're quite just waiters, but I do think there's a truth in that. We seem as if we're more power than we actually have.
Yeah, we carry the glory and the shame of a failure, don't we? Also, we're the sort of front face of it. But I have to say, I don't know if you feel this, because obviously you go way beyond acting into writing and creating. That do you ever feel like it's actually a relief to almost be a waiter sometimes, to just show up and just be told what to do and go, yeah, I'm there. Yeah. I don't have to solve any of it. It's done. I just have to deliver my little piece.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I've been doing my own stuff, and I feel so responsible for it that yes, I really am looking forward to just going, I read these lines, learn these lines, say these lines, don't fall into anything or bump into anybody.
Talking about your novel, I don't want to give the impression that it isn't also riotously funny, because there was a gag in there that just hit me. It was so funny, because what's so brilliant about it is you have all these fascinating characters. You have Handel, you have Hogarth, Franklin, all these people showing up, and obviously George II. But there's this bit where you say, Hogarth could be a sneery bastard when it came to other people's artistic pursuits. He fancied himself a musician of the first order. He was not.
Yeah.
Is that in the stage version as well, that delivery?
It's not. I think it's not, because I wasn't really opening up the world like that, because it is Sancho's world. Hogarth and Garrick and Johnson were all part of the same circle, and Sancho knew them all. And Hogarth was an amateur musician, a bit like Gainsborough. And both he and Gainsborough really fancied themselves. Really, both of them fancied themselves as really good musicians. And Hogarth even wrote a sort of treatise on music, but his other friends were dropped by rumor that he wasn't as good as he thought he was. So I thought I'd add that bit as a sort of local flavor, I suppose. And then you think about Sancho and his work, his actual letters. They're so full of humor. They're so full of Shandian digressions. He's the lover of Lawrence Sterne, so dashes and quick thoughts. When you think about the Gordon riots letters, these most violent riots England has ever known, that took place in London, but certainly outside Sancho's shop in King Charles Street, just off Parliament Street. When he writes with his eye on the humorous. He doesn't simply lay out some facts. He's always trying to entertain while he writes. And I wanted that as well, that in the midst of heavy darkness, there is always going to be humor. There is a survival energy in laughter, in having joy in the small things. I see a lot of communities that don't have a lot of money really enjoy being with each other and laughing and singing and dancing, playing music. You need that to offset the heavy stuff that's actually happening to you. And I think with Sancho, I always needed to keep that slight twinkle in his eyes, like, oh God, you don't know the half of it, And he does it in his letters. He'll say something heavy and then he'll get himself out of it very quickly. So yeah, that's his buoyant spirit that's coming through there in those bits of humour. And I mean, my favourite bit, if I was going to say a favourite bit of my own, and it's not even mine, it's just what happened, was the Royal Fireworks, because that's like, okay, you could make up a set piece like that, and I might have been clever enough to have made it up, but everything that I'm saying is absolutely true. It was April. They did build Versailles. They did light it up. It did get set on fire. A couple of soldiers got their hands burnt. A woman did catch a light. They did have to strip her naked. So, part of the job is to take bits of history and to tease out the humanity in it, and it will always have some light as well as darkness in it.
I have to ask you, as a parting question, because you talk about playing the Beadle and Bill Sikes, but a year ago or 2 years ago, you were Ebenezer Scrooge at the Old Vic.
Yeah.
So I wondered, what springs to mind when you think of that experience? What was that like?
Do you know what? I was thinking about Scrooge when I was doing it, and lovely Christopher Eccleston's doing it this year, so I would urge you to go and see it at the Old Vic, that it was a kind of Hamlet for your middle-aged actor, because he has such a transformation to go through that it needs to be plotted psychologically very carefully so that it doesn't just become a kind of magic thing and bling overnight. His learning is intense and over a very, very short period of time, but he does learn to be a human being. He does learn to have humanity. And it was a beautiful experience. Not only that, you are immersed in Dickens' world. And Jack Thorne's writing is so close to the Dickens that you don't really feel like you're being sold something that's a kind of, strictly speaking, an adaptation. It feels like these are all his words, and they've been constructed brilliantly by Jack Thorne. So it's seamless in that way. But it's a joy because the words are both theatrical and, sort of skillfully wrought, and also quite conversational. It's not quite Shakespeare. It's not even Lawrence Sterne. It's not even late 1700s. It just feels like the first sort of kind of modern writing as well. It's quite journalistic and punchy in words and phrases. I mean, when it comes to the ghosts, it's a bit more lyrical, but it's beautifully styled. And I broke every night. It would break me down every night, that play.
Which point?
When I was at the door with, in fact, the two doors, the Tiny Tim door obviously would always get me when I was just me and the kid, and they were asking, what I had brought, and they're wanting to share. It really always got me. I think because I'd gone so deeply into the life's just about me and everybody else is my enemy and they're out to get me. And to get to the point at which you go, this little child is showing me I know nothing. Look at this. Kid's got nothing and wants to share with me what he's been given. So that always broke me. That always got me. And the bit at the door where I was saying goodbye to the love of his life, who he waited too long to commit himself to.
That's great. I have to say also, you are brilliant at playing bastards. Bastards that people enjoy watching, because I just think of Avenue 5 and Peep Show before then. Where did you discover that in yourself? Because what I'm trying to understand is, as an audience member, we know that on a level you're a very, very decent, kind, generous human being. But then you're displaying something the complete opposite, so we can revel in it. You can carry us through the darkness.
Yeah, maybe I've exposed myself too much that people actually now will not believe me. I mean, honestly, of course. I totally believe that we hold worlds within us and that it's only circumstance and our own will to express things that prevent us from being certain kinds of people. And the kind of person that Johnson is, Alan Johnson, who is the boss of David Mitchell's character Mark in Peep Show, he is without conscience. He is a sociopath with, I think, terrible addiction issues. But more than anything, he is one of these human beings that I would not want to spend 10 minutes with. I guess there's a part of me that's a bit like him, then maybe. I can certainly contact it. The thing where you just make everybody a sort of object in your world as opposed to a real human being with concerns of their own. I think he thinks that we're all the same as him. Like everybody's just fighting this fight and then everybody must be destroyed or undermined or subjugated in some way.
It's quite a Scrooge trait as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Just treat the world like the world's out to get you and get it first.
Paterson, has been so fantastic talking to you. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
And everyone listening to this, wherever you're listening to this, if you look in the description, you can find a link to purchase your copy of The Secret Diaries of Charles Ignatius Sancho, either the book or the audiobook read by Paterson, or both. Up to you. I recommend them both very highly. Thank you so much again.
A real pleasure. Thanks, Dominic.
Thank you for listening to Charles Dickens' A Brain on Fire. If you're enjoying these episodes and would like to make a small donation towards the costs of producing them, please follow the link at the bottom of the description and you can make a donation there. Every coffee you buy makes a huge difference. Thank you ever so much, and see you next time.